welcome back to Print Month 2022. I'm Jenny Gibbs, Executive Director of the IFPDA and the IFPDA Foundation. Today, I'm pleased to bring you our first program in partnership with our friends at the Atlanta University Center Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective. This past summer marked the start of a collaborative internship program between the AUC and the IFPDA. Jade Foreman, an undergraduate from Spelman College, traveled to Copenhagen and Berlin to learn and work in the gallery and legendary printmaking studios of Borch Editions. Today, Jade and Niels Borch Jensen are with us to speak about that experience, and Niels has also kindly agreed to answer questions and share his own experiences about starting out in the world of prints and printmaking. For those of you planning to join us later this month at the IFPDA Print Fair, Niels will be doing another talk at the Javits Center on Sunday, October 30th with Susan Tallman and Matt Saunders on their recent publication, No Plan at All, How the Danish Print Shop of Niels Borch Jensen Redefined Artists' Prints for the Contemporary World. Today's program is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel of the IFPDA as well as our website. If you have any questions for Niels or Jade, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'm very happy to turn this program over to Jade and Niels.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jade Foreman. I'm a junior at Spelman College studying art history. I'm a practicing artist, and I was the summer 2022 intern at Borch Editions.
Hi, Niels Borch Jensen. I had the pleasure of having Jade both in my print shop and in our gallery in Berlin over the summer, which I was very happy with, and we all were.
So with that, we can jump into questions. So I want to start off by asking you, Niels, how did you get started in printmaking, and what was your first job in the business?
I got started in a gymnasium, which is more or less equivalent to American high school. We got my second year, we had a new art teacher who introduced me to printmaking. Very simple, but I was a very bookish student without interest. But the fact with printmaking that you actually used your mind through the fullest, and at the same time had to use your senses to register how the process went, like the simple thing that you can hear when you're rolling ink out. You can hear from the sound when it's at the right point for actually ink in the plate. Things like that started fascinating me. So I started borrowing books from the library about anything print related, and soon ran into the complete works of Goya, which totally blew my mind. And I decided at that time, that is the time you see in the picture here, that I wanted to become a printmaker. And this, I think I was 17 or 18 when this happened. And from then on, it shaped my career. I got my first, right out of high school or gymnasium, I got my first job in a litho studio in Denmark. The guy who was the best known lithographer. I really was in love with etching, but there wasn't any possibility of learning that in Denmark. So I had to do with litho, and spent 2 years at that studio. I think you can go to the next image. This was the first print that actually got me started. It's not a masterpiece, but as you can see, I experimented with how to print it to get the effects that I wanted in the print. That was sort of the start, the fact you realize that if you do this, you do that, sort of with the physical materials, you can get completely different effects and tweak and twist it. You can go to the next one. I think there was one in between, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I studied at the lithography studio in Denmark, and from there I went to a place called the Lakeside Studio in Michigan. I sort of immigrated. I had a green card and everything, but I wasn't all that happy about that studio. So I started looking after about 6-8 months. I started looking for something else to do, try to get into Tamarin, but made the short list, but not access. And at the same time, one of my colleagues in Lakeside had moved to Madrid and worked in a newly founded print shop there called Grupo Quince, which was like a place that actually revolutionized printmaking in Spain during the Franco days. I went there and loved it, and worked there for 3 years. And after that, I went back to Denmark and worked part-time and studied part-time for a couple of years. And then I realized I wanted to found my own print shop, and that was in '79. You can go to the next picture. These pictures are from Madrid, from the print shop there. Oh, there was a Lakeside studio. And if you take the next one again, I think we get to, this is my first print studio where I worked alone. I actually, this was the print shop end, and it was like an L-shaped space, and I actually lived in the other side of the L. It was very primitive, done with absolutely no money, but we survived. Does that answer you?
Yes, I love this story about your first studio and the artist visiting. That was one of the most inspiring moments you told me about during my internship. Since we're talking about your traveling, can you share some of your experiences with working around the world before you started your studio, which you kind of went into, but how that influenced you to start your own studio in Europe with a more American model of a print shop, and what the differences are for viewers who might not know?
Yes, I can. By the time I decided that I wanted to be a printmaker, of course, I started looking up on most things. And the print studio, the litho studio I worked in Denmark was somewhat on the American model. They would invite artists in, and they would work in the studio, and their work would get printed, and they would be assisted by the printers. But it was still a fairly limited. I mean, you could do one thing there, and that would be color lithographs. When I got to Lakeside and I started hearing stories about, and started reading about like the great American, like the great print revival, the print shops that started there, all of a sudden I realized that there was a different attitude coming into printmaking, and it was bringing in a whole different kind of artist compared to the classical printmakers of that I knew from Denmark and Scandinavia. So I was very influenced by that, and listened a lot to the stories that people told about how things were done and how crazy projects they did at Gemini's and fantastic prints at ULAE. So somehow it put a seed in me that was something I really wanted to be part of. When I went to Madrid, I was in a place that was set up in the same way, also on very limited budgets, but with a lot of enthusiasm. So there was an open-mindedness about this, like fresh, like nobody knew exactly how to do it, but everybody was enthusiastic and worked very hard to make it work. And Spain was also a place that was, I mean, I was 22 when I got there, and it was the end of Franco, and it's a very isolated country, but it was a fantastic place to be, and the people there were like amazingly generous and interesting to be around.
Niels, we had a question wondering at what point, if you were only printing images of your own creation or those of other artists, and when that transition might have happened.
There was, I mean, from I left school, when I started working, I was doing my own prints in my spare time and printing for other artists full-time in the daytime. So I was basically a full-time, not apprentice and later on professional printer. The point when I actually stopped doing my own work was after I started my own print shop, and I realized at that time that I was actually more occupied with some of the artists that I worked with their work and how it worked, than with the stuff I was doing myself. So it dawned on me that maybe I also realized how much I enjoyed collaborating with artists. So at that time, without any drama, I just decided this is what I'm doing. So I stopped pretending to be an artist and just do this as my life.
That's wonderful. I love the way you bring other artists into the studio and it becomes a collaborative making process. That brings me to my next question. So what is it like working with different kinds of artists, and how do you manage those relationships as they develop over the years?
I mean, like any sort of, it's a very personal relationship. Obviously, if you're working with an artist, it's a very, you have to get quite close in a way to understand what makes that artist tick, what's important for them, and so on. So it's very important to build up like a language where you can communicate and understand each other without starting to do groupthink. Like I have my role, they have their role, so it's a way of challenging each other, but at the same time respecting the integrity of each other, I think. And by nature, I'm in a way kind of very much an engineering type. I like to figure out how something works or how to make something work. So that's very often I have a ping pong with the artist about what they're interested in. I try to read what their work process is, and I try to find ways of actually getting something in that direction in a very simple way, as simply as possible. I'm not big on complicated solutions. I like simple solutions that get complicated results.
I would say that's a good way to go. This isn't necessarily a question, but I would like you to talk about the importance of experimenting and trying different things in your practice. That was a really big takeaway from my internship this summer. I remember I was working in the print shop and you watched me do it wrong. And it was great. It was an amazing learning experience. You said that it was amazing that I did it wrong. Because it was a way for me to understand the way that it worked. And I know that that's something that you do with other artists as well. You guys try different techniques. And so I would just like you to speak a little bit about the importance of experimentation and trying new things.
I think that's something that came from the influence on me from the American print shops, who basically had to reinvent printmaking for good and bad. I mean, they came up with lots of kind of rules for correct printing that maybe were out of that moment and not necessarily useful now, but there was a great inventiveness and experimentation, which I think was really productive. And one thing I realized, this is over time, it was not something I realized from the beginning, but printmaking for an artist, that in my experience, out of 10 artists, there might be 1 or 2 that actually do meaningful prints and really get into it. And those artists are usually characterized by liking surprises. I mean, it's like when you do printmaking in any form, you're working on a printing matrix, which can be any kind of different materials. It can be wood, it can be copper, it can be stone, it can be something else, potatoes. And you're working towards a goal that's a whole different material, like ink on paper or some other support. And in that process, there's like a gap between what you do and what you get that you can't predict. There's something happens in the printing process that is impossible to predict before you do it. And for the artists who really do good prints, that is an interesting fact. I mean, a lot of artists, in my experience, are trying to lose control in interesting ways. kind of like taking drugs or something, but maybe more productive. But so experimentation is really, I think, key to printmaking. Also, I mean, experimentation in the way that you end up getting, when you see a proof on the wall, I mean, it might be other than you expected, but you can't change. I mean, what's on the plate is on the plate, so you somehow have to deal with that. And then you have to come up with something, and very often you have to come up with something that you didn't expect you had to. So I think it's kind of crucial. Also, what makes prints for me very exciting, that you actually do has to invent things as you go.
I agree. I think that's
of experiments. Just to finish it off, is of course, as a professional printer, it's important that you control the techniques that you. I mean, you have to use the same technique. For most artists who are printmakers, they will learn the techniques in a form that they need for their work. But in my case, since I work with many different artists, I also have to understand how it works in all kinds of other situations. So I have to do lots of experiments just to, we do that constantly, to improve how an aquatint works, make a better varnish for something, or test how this and that works. So when the artist is there and wants something that we're not used to, we still have an understanding of things, so we can slide into it.
That's really wonderful. I remember learning a lot about how you come up with your procedures, but also like materials. Like there's certain varnishes that you make, and some of like the printmakers had like explained that to me, and I thought that was just really wonderful. Like, kind of like a mad scientist. It's really cool. So what do you love the most about what do you do?
About working with prints?
Yes. About being a gallery owner, about being a printmaker. What's your favorite?
My role is really in this business. I mean, at some point, at one point, I was myself as a printer and collaborator with the artist and the publisher and the salesperson. And that was not my ideal. I mean, the part I like is actually working on the prints, like working with the artist on the prints and finding out how to do it. And that's why I was such a bad dealer, because the minute I had a chance, I would start, any excuse, I would be working with the prints rather than calling up people or do things like that. So I came into this because I fell in love with prints, and that's still it.
Wonderful. So what is the most challenging part of running your business?
Surviving, I would say. I mean, I think most print shops have had crises. Like most print shops have sort of defining artists that sort of somehow meant an awful lot to each print shop. I mean, I've had like a handful or two, and other print shops have had the same. But so apart from surviving financially, the challenge, there's a big challenge sometimes in when you do projects that are like, if you work on a project and you actually sometimes have to take chances, and if it's very large projects, it can be very big chances, and there's definitely excitement in that. But there's also this excitement that when you're working on a project and it goes differently from what you will, and the excitement of trying things out and trying to get it back on track. But the whole process is something I quite enjoy.
What would you tell your younger self now that you can reflect on all of these things that you love and the challenges? What would you tell your younger self? What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Probably if I know everything I know now, by then I probably definitely not have started a print shop and stayed on as that. I don't know, but there's no key. But what I realized going through my life with this and through whatever crisis there have been and so on. And there have been some really bad ones where we've been very close to closing. What was my point here? It's like, basically, I mean, it's not something, when you start out on something. My book is called No Plan at All, and that's for a reason that if you start planning everything when you start, it's not going to be fun. I mean, it's somehow, if you feel like it, and it's like the thing to do, you should do it, even though it's not, there's no guarantee that it works. I mean, as a young person, I realized and set myself the thing that the only sins that I would regret would be the things of not doing something. Like if you don't try it, you might regret it for the rest of your life. But if you tried it and it went wrong, I mean, okay, it went wrong, and then you go on.
All right. I have a couple questions from the audience. How do you think the emerging NFT market will impact printmaking?
That's a good question. Personally, but again, I'm 70 years old. I still think my computer is against me. So the NFT is not something, I understand the principles and so on, but it's not something I see much use of. Kind of. I mean, again, I'm somebody who's fascinated with the physical world, and NFTs are kind of things that don't really have a physical presence. I mean, they can be on this screen, they can be on that screen, and so on. So it's not something that interests me a lot. It might, I doubt that it will change much for printmaking. It might change something in other markets, but printmaking, I mean, the point in printmaking in a way nowadays, because it's a slow and expensive and impractical way of producing objects, but it's interesting because it has some very specific physical characters. And that's the part that I'm interested in. NFTs, it seems like it's kind of to me, it looks like tulip bulbs. That, you might get somebody to want to buy like 100,000 of something that they don't get and they don't have. I don't see the fun in that, personally. And I doubt, I mean, it's not going to make us change in that direction, I think. I mean, the physicality of what we're doing is really what interests me. Of course, I might be totally wrong.
We have a couple questions that's asking about the process of auditioning. So if you could just talk a little bit about that. Some people are wondering if you make all of them at the same time, and what the process of auditioning is like, because you mentioned the unpredictability of printmaking at times. And so when you audition something and you need to have copies, what does that process look like?
I mean, here there's a process of actually getting to a bon rate, to the proof that the artist accepts, and that is a process where I'm mostly involved nowadays, and that has to do with like doing stuff to the plate, making proofs, and doing changes and changing colors and so on. So, but once you have a finished proof that is like okay. Then you still have the process of actually printing the edition. And that, by us, it's usually done. I mean, we do the whole edition in one go, because if not, you waste a lot of time. I mean, with prints that are just a little bit complicated, there's a lot of adjustments when you start up to get everything, like all the colors matched exactly and get everything. So if you try to spread that out and say we do 5 prints now and then we wait and see and then maybe do 5 more, then you waste an awful lot of time and the edition will be quite uneven because you not have it. I mean, for the printer, you sort of get your hands into a project, and then after a few prints, it's sort of going. It has its momentum, and you keep it around. But if you break that up, even by by somebody disturbing you, you can kind of start all over again, and that's not so much fun. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think so. It looks like we have a couple young printmakers in the chat, and people are wondering what your advice for younger printmakers are, someone that's just graduated with a printmaking degree, and they want to get back into it.
Oh, of course, I've been in a fairly, in Copenhagen, it's not a place with a lot of, it used to be a place with a lot of traffic, people coming in and out and going around. But in my own experience, I basically looked for work actively and contact whatever there might be a chance. And I think that's best, that you find out which places exist and which ones are possible to go to, and that I would say the willingness to travel is a good thing in that situation, because there are places, but there are not that many in any one place. So if you don't get a job in this place in your town, you might have to go to a whole different area.
All right, that's good advice. I'm gonna remember that when I graduate. Noted. So I think that getting into the art world and collecting art can be kind of scary if you don't know where to start. And I think that the Borch Collective that you guys just started is a great way for people to start their own collection and to have work in their house. Could you talk a little bit about the Borch Collective?
Yes, it was one of our Siri, who works in the gallery side of this, who came up with it, and it's basically it's kind of sort of like it's called a circle, and basically the model is that if 6 people get together and say they want to have a subscription or half a year for having prints in their home, we have a setup with like a transport box and framed prints that fit of different artists, and we will bring them. They will collect six prints and take one each, and then they would circulate them every month so that everybody has one of the prints every print hanging for 1 month each in their homes. And our response is that from people who do it is that they're quite happy about it, because they see something they probably wouldn't have found by themselves, and they get an understanding of what it is. It is a little bit of a laborious way of doing, because it needs that people are physically near you for the picking up and circulating and so on. But it is functioning here, and people are happy about it.
So we have another audience question. How do you decide which artists to work with? Do you approach artists or do they approach you? You're very established now, but when you were starting off, how did it work? Before you begin, I just want to say I love the story about Per Kirkeby, one of the first artists that came to your studio. If you wanted to, start at the beginning.
Well, in that case, with Kirkeby's case, I knew of him because he was like the hippest artist in Denmark at the time, but I didn't know him personally. And when I started the print shop where I was living in the back end, one morning, for my time, quite early, like 8:30 or 9, somebody rang the doorbell, and there was this guy who kind of actually looked exactly like a school teacher in Denmark. But he had something about him that sort of wasn't school teacher like. But it showed up to be Per Kirkeby, and he had a handful of small zinc plates that he had been working on and printing in different variations since this was in '79, and the prints had been around since '63. So they had all these total cobwebs of old bright point lines that you just scratch on top of for each new incarnation of the prints. And he asked me to do like, I think one print of each, and then he would come back and look at the prints, and then he would maybe decide to get 5 prints of that, 3 prints of that, but a very small kind of operation. But I mean, he was very obviously a dedicated printmaker, but he'd only done like little black and white prints basically, and some lithography. So I tried to kind of get him to do more ambitious works and try, you know, just something like that. But in general, I mean, some artists come to us and we, you know, if you think that they have something, you know, we invite them to us. So we offer to publish their work. That happened with Jan Vo, who came and just needed 1 print for a price he had won, which obligated him to make an edition for them. And he was just, I mean, when I talked to him the first time, I just thought he was quite special, and there was definitely something there. So I just told him if he had any ideas for doing other prints, he should just come to us. So that's one way it happened. He came to me, but then I thought that it would be very interesting to do something. And sometimes we go to artists and say, I really want to. That's most of the time. I really want to do prints with you. Can we figure out something? But it does work in all kinds of ways, actually. It also works quite a lot by one artist telling another artist that you know, somebody, we do prints with somebody and they're happy, then they talk to other people. So it works in all the possible kinds of ways, I would say. But in principle, most of our work is our own publishing. So of course we have to have an eye on, like, not that every project has to be profitable necessarily, but that on the whole, we still have to survive from it.
Right. Where do you see the future of Borch editions? How are you imagining the legacy
Of working?
Of Borch editions.
Of Borch editions?
How do you imagine the future, the legacy?
Well, at the moment, we have been for quite a while. We are beginning to try to make a generational shift. It doesn't mean that I want to retire, but it means that I will pull back a little bit in the print shop, that the others will do more of the collaboration, the direct collaboration, and I'll be here. But I'll be here and we discuss like what we're doing and so on. So we're trying to train people here to continue it also after I kick off. But retiring is not really something I will do voluntarily. Of course, you can always be forced to it. I mean, if you get sick, you get sick.
Right. We have another question from the audience, and it's a 2-part question, part for me and part for you. So they want me to talk about my experience as an intern, and then they're asking me, what was it like to have an intern from the US? So my experience interning with Borch Editions was wonderful. I spent the majority of my time at the Berlin Gallery. I was doing research and coming up with texts for some of the archival pieces that we have. And I helped to curate the front showroom on a weekly basis. I was able to go to Copenhagen for a week where I interviewed Niels. I learned from the best. I saw the printmakers in action, and I even got to print some of my own stuff. It was the most incredible time ever. Niels?
Well, I mean, we used to, I mean, the fact that you're American, I mean, it was interesting because it seemed out your family knew something about blues and stuff. So, but other than that, it was just, I mean, you were a great asset. You did some really relevant work and functioned very well. We all liked you. And we are, of course, we work with artists from quite a few American artists, but artists from all over. So the fact whether you're American or you have been Spanish or something else was not the issue. It's not an issue here. I mean, it's the issue is really if you're an enthusiastic person, or somebody who fits in, and you definitely did.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was incredible. It really was. I was so inspired, and I'm grateful for the time that I was able to spend with you guys. So, what should I not do going forward? What are the most common mistakes that you see made by young people who are trying to enter the business and start their careers?
That is a hard one for one thing, because I mean, I've chosen one path, and there are like 100 paths to choose. So it all depends a lot on who you are, but that's probably also the best advice, that you should choose something that you actually identify with, not something that sounds clever or other things. I mean, basically, if you dedicate yourself to something and you actually, and it's for real, you will find you can find a way of doing it, and people recognize that you're serious. I mean, the worst thing is to be sort of over smart and kind of superficial. I mean, that's in most art circles. That, I mean, not talking about the gallery world, but in most art circles, it's being real is like the thing.
It's great advice. Another question from the audience. What is your experience of printing for others? I'll quote them. Phil Sanders in his talk last week encouraged all printmakers to print for other people. He said you learn so much and have to meet someone else's standards. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I also, for many years, had, I mean, we worked for over the years for many artists who were not sort of, not art that I was particularly interested in, but we learned amazing amount of doing stuff that we wouldn't have thought of doing, but that somebody wanted to do to a certain standard, and it was a fantastic learning thing. And I think it's very important that you, if you only work with people you're like friends with or buddies with, or like, you know, and you think that you very easily get into this group think, back scratching thing of like, oh, I think you're great, oh, I think you're great too, and you don't challenge yourself. I mean, if you're working with somebody who has like a strict standard, and say, I want it done like this and that, I want it to look like this and that, and you have to come up with a way of doing it. You learn a lot more from that than from just you know, working with things that you're familiar with and people you're familiar with, and I think I completely agree. The other thing is that printing for yourself, your own work, you think about the art or the whole. I mean, you keep doing something. You basically keep working on the work for each print. Like you try things out, or you're thinking about how to wipe it, how to do it, and it's a less objective way of printing. I mean, instead of thinking about I want to do it exactly like that and it has to be the same the next time, that's something you learn a lot. It's sort of, you get the professionalism from working with others. You don't quite get it from working with yourself, because it's you who decides whether it's good or not.
I think that's a very good point. Thank you. Could you come a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No problem. Another question from the audience. Do you think that the Eastern and Western printmaking market are in conversation together, or do you think there is a divide?
You mean like between Asia and the West, or do you mean in the American scene? I'm not quite sure how you mean it.
See, they weren't very specific in the question. I suppose you can interpret it
Okay. I mean, I think since the 60s, probably the printmaking, the most important printmaking market for contemporary prints has been in America, definitely. And East Coast, West Coast. I mean, there's been a dominance of New York in a way, but I don't know enough about it. But there are also important places on the West Coast, so I don't know enough about it. If you mean like between Asia and Europe or America, it's becoming more and more. I mean, there's places in Asia that are kind of like I do modeling on the American revival, kind of, all-inclusive print shop where you can experiment with all kinds of things, rather than the classical Asian print traditions. So there's something there's a blending going on, in my opinion. I mean, some American print shops, I think Round Point Press was the first to use ukiyo-e printers to do editions for Western artists, so on. So there's some exchange going on, but it's still quite distinct traditions. And I don't think the print market is nearly as in some Asian countries. I have a feeling that prints are considered reproductions, where in the West, I mean, since the 60s at least, they're definitely considered original artworks. But other than that, I won't say it's something I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about.
Understandable. My next question is really me. It's me asking you to tell a story. One of the best parts of my internship was the time that I was able to spend interviewing you and hearing your stories. They were so inspiring. And I was wondering if you could talk about the printing press that you made from the Shoemakers Press. I think it's one of the most inspiring stories I've ever heard. It made me think like, how can I turn this nothing into something? How can I make this into what I want? And I would just like you to share that with the audience, because I think it really instills something in other people too.
This happened when I at school, when I was in school, and this art teacher sort of introduced me to printmaking. First, there was only a couple of brayers and some linoleum, but then he invested in a very small tabletop etching press that I pretty much monopolized for a while. But then I saw in town, this Shoemakers Press, which is a small press with steel rollers that's used to press sole leather for shoes, or was used to press leather harder for the soles of shoes. There were, at that time, nobody was doing that, so there was just there as an antique relic showing up. And I talked to the guy who had it, because those presses I knew could be converted into a small etching press. So we bought the press for like $30. My father helped me, and then I rigged it with a construction that would hold the press bed, and turned it into a small etching press that I installed in my room. So I had my own little print shop in my room at home.
It's amazing.
I ended up, when I left for America, I gave it to an artist friend.
Another question from the audience. What other printing presses or independent presses do you see as your closest colleagues in other countries?
Oh, there's quite a few that I know quite well, partly because they participated in some of the art fairs that we were with, and also because I always like to visit other print shops when I travel. If I go someplace, I try to visit the colleagues if possible, and so people we know quite well. It's like Gemini people, the Two Palms in New York. There was Maurice Payne in New York. There's Maurice Sanchez. So I know some print people, but it's more by being interested in seeing them. I have some colleagues here in Europe where we have sort of a little network to help each other out a bit. There's the former Kurt Sein print shop in Vienna. There's Dan Albert Benveniste in Madrid. I have a colleague in Sweden, and we sort of share things.
That's great. I always think professional relationships they're necessary for our growth, and being able to consult with other people who understand what you're doing and what your mission is. All right, we have one question coming all the way from the UK. They're looking for advice on setting up their own studio, a larger studio, and they're asking if you would employ a technician.
Pardon? What?
The person that has asked this question is trying to open their own print studio, it seems, a larger studio, and they're asking if you have any advice for opening a larger studio and if you would hire a technician for something like that.
I mean, I know how I set up myself, which was kind of a simple one-man studio, but I did get hold of an old press and got it up on the third floor, not by myself. But are they printers or printmakers who want to set up a larger studio, or they want to do it as publishers? How is
it didn't get too specific.
Okay.
But they asked, what would you advise on setting up my own larger studio? Would you employ a technician?
I mean, a studio is a fairly simple setup, but it still can be done. I mean, a lot of stuff can be done basically in simple ways. You can find it on the web, like how do you make an Aquatin box? How do you what are the best way of doing this and that. It depends on your. I mean, if you want to set up a larger studio, I presume you have some experience in printmaking and trained somewhere. The thing is that one thing you should never do larger. Here, I mean larger prints, like so you have larger presses. Is that you should definitely not underestimate the stress on the press. Like I remember when I did when in '85, I decided to make the largest practical press I could or have made. And that was, I had it, and it showed up that it was underdimensioned. I mean, when you put the kind of pressure you have in an etching press and stretch it over 5 feet, there's a lot of tension on the rollers, and we had a roller that was maybe 25 centimeters in diameter, and it flexed like a bamboo stick. So you should be careful that you don't underdimension things. And you should be, the other thing that you should be careful of is that you do need a lot of other space than the press and the inking table. I mean, you will very quickly need storage space, and you will need, all kinds of shelf space, table spaces for this, table space for that, and so on. But other than that, simple advice, I don't know. But if there's any particular problem, they can send an email. I mean, if they have specific questions about this or that thing.
Before we wrap it up, I'm going to ask one last question. It's a little bit more technical, so you've got to take us to school in these last couple of minutes.
Yeah.
You make a beautiful photogravure prints. What is your method for making polymer photogravure plates now? Do you use QTR or another tool for calibration?
For calibration, honestly, calibration is something that Tom does. So I don't know, but we make our own curves. Basically, we sit and we look at an image, and then we decide which part of it we want to make darker and lighter and so on to get a curve that gives us the grayscale in the image that we want. So that's something that's pretty much handmade by eyeballing it. But,
yeah, the richness of those works is incredible. Looking at them online is one thing, but when I first stepped into the gallery and I saw the photogravure prints, I was like, wow.
We have spent a lot of time, I mean, really a lot of time and a lot of money on making grayscales and printing and looking at it, and then just keep adjusting and doing. So by now, I mean, we've done that we started doing these polymer plates in I think 90 or 91. So it's now 30 years and in that period, plates have changed a bit, and they've been different, and films almost disappeared, and now you can print out your own films, and so there's been a resetting of everything for at least 5 or 6 times in those 30 years, where we sort of had to rethink and recalibrate everything and figure out how to use a different kind of plate or a new version of the same plate and so on. So there's been a lot of challenges, something you seem to have to be over the whole time, and it's kind of once in a while you spend some time just checking the calibrations and getting the grayscales and so on, experiment with different inks and so on. So it's has been an ongoing process for us. At the moment, everything's been stable for a while. Nobody has changed our plates and so on. But it's doing that, we're working with materials that are made for industry, for different and much bigger industry. So nobody makes it specifically for us. And that means that when the industry moves, the materials moves a little bit, and then we have to figure it out again.
It's very interesting.
An experience to do that, yeah.
That was amazing. Thank you, Niels and Jade. And thank you to our partners at the Atlanta University Center Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective. I hope you can join us tomorrow for another highlight of Print Month, Print Study Day, which is organized annually by the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This year's speakers will present new research into a wide range of topics, including the work of 15th century Netherlandish engravers, the production of prints that imitate drawings, and Vincent van Gogh's lithographic process. I'll see you tomorrow, and I hope to also see you live and in person October 27th to the 30th at the Javits Center in New York for the IFPDA Print Fair, where we will continue our Print Month programming in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I can't wait to see you all in New York.
See you soon, then.